Two verses appear to teach this. Matthew 13:55 says,
Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas?
In the first century a son would typically follow in the profession of his father. So Joseph, being a carpenter, would most likely teach his son carpentry. The second verse, Mark 6:3, is more direct.
Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph, and of Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him.
This verse appears to declare explicitly that Jesus was a carpenter. Let us examine some Bible translations. The HCSB, ESV, NASB, NIV, KJV, NKJV, NLT, and NET all say Jesus was a carpenter. All major modern translations agree. What about some ancient translations? The Latin Vulgate, completed about AD 400, refers to Jesus as a faber, meaning a craftsman or an artisan. This is a more general term incorporating many different disciplines, not just carpentry. The Wessex Gospels are Old English translations completed before the year 1000, and they said Jesus was a smith, meaning one who works with metal. The Tyndale New Testament completed in 1526 said Jesus was a carpenter. These are some of the translations, before the King James Version 16:11. In AD 400 Jesus was described as a craftsman or an artisan, near 1000 he was described as a worker with metal, and in 1526 he was called a carpenter. While probably every major translation after Tyndale has followed his translation of carpenter, there was disagreement before that. The Greek word used in both Matthew 13 and Mark 6 is tekton. Greek dictionaries have some interesting insights into this word. The table here summarizes their thoughts. While Thayer exclusively references the idea of carpentry, the rest include that idea but add more. The evidence will show that the definition provided by Lou and Nita is the most accurate. The Greek word tekton refers to someone who builds using whatever material necessary, be it wood, carpentry, stone, masonry, or metal. Smithery. The more recent dictionaries tend to emphasize tekton as someone who builds things. The dictionary by Lou and Nita adds an interesting sentence at the bottom of their entry. There is every reason to believe that in biblical times, one who was regarded as a tekton would be skilled in the use of wood and stone and possibly even metal. They are trying to make clear that this word is not limited to the idea of a carpenter. The best way to study this word, which only occurs a few times in the New Testament, is to go back and look at the way the people used it near the 1st century. Did they describe a tekton as someone who worked only with wood, or did they describe it as someone who worked with several different materials? The ancient uses of tekton reveal several instances where this word is used to describe someone working only with wood. Epictetus, who died in AD 135, said, "This man is a carpenter." Why? Because he uses an Epictetus indicated that the tekton was a carpenter, because he used an axe. Other uses of tekton do not fit the idea that it refers exclusively to a carpenter. Plutarch, who died about AD 120, said, "And so a tekton would regard the welding of iron or the tempering of an axe." So tekton in this writing referred to a smith, someone who worked with metal. Philo, a 1st-century Hellenistic Jewish man living in Alexandria, used the word in a manner consistent with the idea of a carpenter, but none of the examples are so specific that it demands that the word refer only to carpentry. Josephus, a Jewish historian who died around the year AD 100, wrote two famous works, The Antiquities of the Jews and The Wars of the Jews. Every use of the word tektn in the Antiquities of the Jews is consistent with the idea of a carpenter and describes someone involved with building the temple, the tabernacle, or the palace. However, he was describing people building a long time before his writing. The word occurs 4 times in the Wars of the Jews, and all of them refer to a builder in general and not specifically a carpenter. Describing the fortification of the camps of the Roman armies prior to battle, he portrays the leveling of the ground and the measurement of a square. For this purpose the army is accompanied by tektinot, a multitude of workmen and of tools for building. Josephus summoned tekton masons, and directed them to increase the height of the wall. Under this screen the tekton builders raised the wall to a height of 20 cubits. The works being completed, the Richthof engineers measured the distance to the wall with lead and line. All of these references are to the work of builders. Wood is not involved, but earth and stones. So in his commentary on the biblical story, Josephus employs tekton to portray primarily the craft of carpentry, but in his contemporary references, about which he had first-hand knowledge, he understands the term to apply to the work of building or construction. If a tekton was someone who worked only with wood and these walls were constructed not only of wood but mainly of stone, no one would order a tekton to come and increase the height of the wall. They will summon a mason. But they summoned the tekton, because they were people skilled at building with various materials. All of the uses in the wars of the Jews seem to describe the job of a mason rather than the job of a carpenter. The Old Testament background for builders. Some helpful information from the Old Testament comes from the idea that builders did not typically specialize in a certain area, like wood, metal, or stone. For example, Exodus 35 verses 30-35 describes Baalel as a generalist who worked with several different materials. Bible scholar Ken Campbell has analyzed the Old Testament data, and concluded that the Israelite builder did not limit himself to working with only one material. He could move from stone to metal to wood as the need or opportunity arose, and while he could probably specialize in one material if that was advantageous, he did not normally restrict himself in this way, as many modern tradesmen do. Campbell says those who were builders in the Old Testament time period did not specialize, they were general contractors. They kept their job description as broad as possible so they could work wherever there was need in order to find employment. A tekton was someone who worked with stone, wood, and metal. Jesus did carpentry, but he was also a mason and a smith. The phrase used today for an ancient tekton is a general contractor or a builder. When ancient sources wanted to specify that someone was a mason, they would say he was a builder in stone. When they wanted to say someone was a smith, they would say he was a builder in metal. When they wanted to say someone was a carpenter, they would say he was a builder with wood. But neither Matthew nor Mark mention that Jesus specialized in one material, so we should not add any specialization either. The majority of references to building in Israel reference work in stone, because of the material culture of Israel in the time of Jesus. To think that Jesus would have only worked in wood would be difficult to prove based on the materials people were working with in the culture of Israel in the 1st century. Joseph and Jesus were probably builders in the general sense and not specifically carpenters. So this legend is not a mistaken legend but a misleading legend. Jesus was more than a carpenter, but a builder. The question inevitably arises, why did 16th century translators employ the term carpenter to translate tekton? Prior to the Reformation, translations varied. Gothic AD 360, used Timeruan. Vulgate AD 400, used Faber. Anglo-Saxon 995, used Smith. Wycliffe AD 1389, used Smith. Tyndale AD 1526, used carpenter. Henceforth, all English, German, French, and other European translations followed the lead of William Tyndale, in rendering tekton as carpenter. Why? One reason were a few comments in the Church Fathers about the alleged woodworking activity of Jesus. Another was the 1,000 years of medieval paintings that portrayed Jesus as a European woodworker using European tools to fashion European furniture in a European workshop. As a rule, unless they visited the land of Israel, people assumed that the material culture there was similar to their own. Since most European homes were constructed of timber, it was easy to assume that homes in Israel were built the same way, and that clothing and social customs were not much different from those of the translator. Today, we should not ignore the evidence of archaeology and ethnography that is now abundant as we translate biblical texts. In a land of omnipresent stone and few trees, a craftsman worked primarily in stone, and much less in wood or metal.